All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I apologize for the delay. The previous session ran long, which means it must have been very valuable content. So I hope Kathy and I can do the same for you. We are moving from a panel to more of a fireside chat because there's two of us here today. One of the other panelists could not make it. So just to make sure you're in the right place at the right time, this is the Digital Transformation, New Times, New Opportunities Fireside Chat. My name is Marion Cook. I'm a solution principal with Slalom, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Kathy Tyra. In just a moment, we'll do our formal introductions, but just to give you an orientation of what this is about, to remind you, we are in the middle of a crisis, and that requires some certain leadership skills, or are they all that different from when we're not in a crisis? We'll have a conversation around that. So we're going to talk about leadership skills used to navigate the unknown, and the issues created by COVID and other things that may come our way. It is a skill set to be able to deal with this kind of turbulence, and we're going to talk about that. And you know, these skills really can relate to a lot of other things that may happen to you throughout your career. So let me loop back and let Kathy, who is the Vice President, Workplace Resources and Real Estate, and as of January, also responsible for crisis management. Oh, we were younger then, weren't we, Kathy?
We were.
So with NetApp. So Kathy, I'm gonna let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Kathy Tyra. Currently the VP of Workplace Resources Real Estate. And as Marion said, on January 21st, I inherited our crisis team. I've been at NetApp 15 years, been across a bunch of different areas: supply chain, product strategy, transformation. I switch jobs about every 3 years because I like to say I get bored and want to learn something new. But I'm usually, it's in an operational role. I'm just a big ops nerd, and you know, that kind of keeps me happy, making calm out of chaos.
So an ops nerd, that you're devaluing actually what it is you do, because without you, the world grinds to a halt. So I won't allow you to denigrate your skill set. It's really phenomenal, impressive.
Oh, thank you.
Very
thank
impressive. And I think we are of a common tribe in that I've also changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because I always want to learn. I want to know where the market's going, and I want to be there. What is the market value, and be there as well.
And your background's phenomenal. So could you introduce yourself as well? Because I was so impressed when I've heard all the things you've been doing.
You're very kind, and your standards are low, and I appreciate it.
No.
All right, so I've had a long career in the private sector, in consulting, out of consulting, starting up businesses, managing other people's businesses. I've had a blast doing a wide variety of things, both in I would say the C-suite. I eventually became a CIO, and also then on the other side of the desk in consulting. And then I got an interesting call from the governor's office here in the state of Illinois. This is a couple of years ago. I was not expecting that. My sort of career mantra has always been to run to problems, not from them. So when I got the call from state government, I was like, oh, well, this is a meaty puzzle. And just time boxed it to be 2 years because I didn't want a career in government, but I really, really enjoyed the work that I did there on a massive digital transformation, did all kinds of great stuff around emerging technology and innovation and all of that, had an absolute blast. I actually would highly recommend people do at least a stint in government because it just well-rounded me in terms of a citizen. I really didn't know what state government did, and now I see it's an incredible portfolio of services and products and assets, and I have a much greater appreciation for that. Now, coming out of that, so I told the governor just 2 years, and so as I started to think about leaving, I thought, well, what do I want to do? And when I look back over it, the thing that's given me the most joy is, like you, Kathy, I like to learn. I want to be constantly learning and growing my skill set, and nothing does that better than consulting. So I run the Emerging Technology and Innovation team for Slalom Consulting in Chicago. I also am very fortunate to work with MIT. I'm their head learning facilitator for 2 classes there, one on blockchain and the other one on corporate innovation and innovation ecosystems. And I'm also very fortunate to work with Singularity University as a guest lecturer, where I do work in education around the future of cities, the future of work, and around leadership and exponential leadership. So I've had a blast of a career, and I plan on continuing to do so.
Me too. And you have an awesome background. So I'm glad I asked.
Well, I'm having fun. That's the goal for me, is to
It
learn,
is. Me
have
too.
fun, and make money.
Me, you
Right?
go. I agree.
All right,
Uh,
so let me just ask you something. You know, when I've got kids who are coming out of college now, and they have gone through that whole struggle of what do I want to be when I grow up, and you know, so to people who are more junior in their career, what sort of advice do you have? What kind of impacts were there on your own career trajectory?
well, before I went to college, I either wanted to be a lawyer or an interior designer. So that tells you how messed up my head was. But
Oh, no, no, no,
I
no.
focused on business, came out and got into supply chain a little bit by accident and grew in that. I'd say my one piece of advice is don't be afraid to try something new. And you should keep trying new things, even if it's something you don't think you would like or something you might not be good at. And some of the best jobs that I've had were actually roles that I didn't like that well in the time. When I had product strategy for a year, it was a rotational role. I was really out of my element and very uncomfortable. But after that, what was amazing, I then reported to CFO, and they were all shocked how much I knew about the product life cycle, product development,
Yeah.
pricing, licensing, and I just knew how that machine worked, and that was great insight for the group I went to. And then, I still understand what they do, so I could place value on it, know where now in real estate facilities, I understand what their needs are. And they're usually pretty surprised that I understand that and that I can actually help them on their problems. So don't shy away from things. A lot of my best opportunities happen during downturns. So I know some people, love riding the wave up. Some people only want to do that. Some people love the cost cutting, efficiency, transformation. And I've done both. And I think you can succeed in both. And many times when my responsibility expanded was, unfortunately during downturns, and maybe there was another person let go. And I've always kind of joked that, I didn't so much as volunteer, I was just slow taking the step backwards. So it looked like I was volunteering, but I ended up running credit and collections and order management, renewals, and all kinds of things like that. I ended up doing RPA. I was the first one to do that.
Oh.
So, there's a lot of things you can learn. You don't have to be an expert. You have to have good people around you. You have to have curiosity, and deliver. So those are some of the things that. Words of advice I would give to anybody.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Have that strong sense of curiosity and always be building your skill set. I will tell you, one of the couple of formulative things that happened to me early in my career was I went to IBM, my first job out of college, right? And I was there for a couple of years, and they went through massive layoffs. And I just want to tell you that that didn't happen because of me.
Well, we're good. It's good to know that.
I joined, they laid people off. They're not connected. But anyway, I saw a number of people who were my mentors who ended up getting laid off. Mm-hmm. And, they were people in their 50s and 60s who thought they'd have that job forever, because that's how it used to be with IBM. And they were wonderful people. But when you took a big step back, they would say, well, I've been with IBM 30 years, but in some ways it was the same year 30 times.
Very true. Or you hear that's the way we've always done it,
right.
It works, why fix it?
Yeah, so while their salaries went up, their value had plateaued or maybe even gone down.
Yeah.
And the market wasn't going to reward that when they left. So my big takeaway from that, again, is have that curiosity. Always be learning new things. Always get out there and try stuff. Get uncomfortable.
Right.
That's where the learning is. And then the second thing that happened was it's just interesting. They happened, when my first job right out of college was there was a client who was so upset at the previous systems engineer that they said, if that person comes back on our property, we're going to call the police. So talk about a client.
Pretty radical.
Radical. And the manager joked with us and said, who wants that client? And I raised my hand because I thought, well, there's nowhere to go but up. If the client stays upset, nobody's going to blame me. But if I can get the skill of being able to turn something around, that'll be phenomenal. And it just did great things for my brand, and it gave me a sort of a sense of fearlessness.
And, you know, I've done similar things. I've done big system implementations, like for our quoting system. And, you know, a lot of times you'll do pilots and you pick the smallest geo or you pick the smallest region because it's easy. And whatever it is I'm interacting with our field, I try and pick the 3 toughest regions because I know their standards are so high. And if you can solve their problems, and by the way, you really should, because they're all very important segments of our business. But if you can solve their problems, the rest is a piece of cake. And everybody else thinks they're a little troublesome. So, you know, getting them to be your cheerleaders really helps with the change management too.
Yeah, if you put yourself in the fire, people will appreciate, they'll recognize and understand that. All right, so I just wanted to spend a few minutes giving more than just the resume background, a little color to our journeys, a couple of lessons learned, and I hope that's helpful for people who are sitting in on this. So I want to set the stage for just a moment, because we are in this incredible, tumultuous period, and I want to let people know that there's actually a pattern to disruption, and talk about how that flows and what that can mean, so people can see the bigger picture, because we're in the middle of a crisis. Sometimes you just can't see that. So so there's a pattern to disruption, and we're going to talk, I'm going to kind of outline it, and we'll talk about the crisis around it, but then we also want to talk about the opportunity that it presents. So the pattern here is you have a normal, whatever that normal may be. We had a nice bull run for 10 years or so. A lot of things worked, and we didn't change them too much because they did work. So, all right, boom, shock to the system, there's a crisis. Can last 2 to 3 months or longer or shorter, kind of depends what it is. In our case, you know, we're right there right now, and some companies are starting to move out of that. So when you're in crisis mode, you're really not interested in innovation. You're just interested in survival. You know, people are kind of back on their heels, trying to just figure out, you know, how are we going to make people work remotely, or are we going to have to lay people off, and how are we going to do that? So there's that crisis mode that we have to learn how to manage. But then we move into a period of chaos that actually is an opportunity. And I am getting somebody just put themselves on mute. I was getting a little bit of back chatter there. So we go from this crisis mode and then into chaos, and that's where the opportunity is. So there's that period of chaos before it moves into the new normal, whatever that is. And it's right there that the opportunity is. And we can't lose sight of this. And you know, what's going on now is shaking us in so many ways. And I don't mean to discount the human suffering that's going on as a result of that. As business people, and we take a step back, we want to make sure that we take care of our people during that crisis. But we also have an opportunity to experiment as we move into that chaos time. So I just wanted to bring that up as sort of a pattern. I don't know, Kathy, if that's something that you see as well.
Yeah, I do. I think for us, you know, it was immediate crisis, right? And we were on it. And, you know, within the last month or so, unfortunately, I have to say the crisis became routine from what you did to react to it. Okay, not that, again, that it's a terrible tragedy, what we're going through, but the amount of effort to manage that became less. And that's when we shifted our gears and our sights on what is our new normal. So we're actively working on that. We've got one hand in making sure, you know, the crisis, we're on top of everything there. And we've got, you know, more focus on what's it going to look like 3 months, 6 months, 2 years from now. And our focus is also, you know, so there's things from, we're looking at, you know, how do we engage with our customers? How does that really change, right? In the past, we jumped on planes and flew everywhere and, you know, had big expense accounts for meals out. We had big trade shows and training. We would bring people into our executive briefing centers, and now we're going to virtual executive briefings, virtual meetings on Zoom all day. And so I think our digital team in that end has done a great job of shifting gears and actually being more effective in some cases than we were. We're getting more reach than we did. But I think then the tendency is to go back to that old pattern. And so it's like, how do you reinforce the new goodness that came out of that? We're also focused, you know, it's pretty tactical, but it's just huge, is what does return to office look like? And I've been very particular on this point. It is not return to work. It is return to office, because everybody has been working so hard, you know, at home under really, you know, stressful conditions with kids. And, you know, maybe you had grown kids move home with you because they lost their jobs or things like that. So it's very difficult, stressful. So we're working through that. Then we're also working on what's our long-term work strategy look like. And the big piece of transformation of that we're just at the beginning of tackling is that's where the opportunity for change comes, because you don't want to do things exactly the way you did when you were in the office. So how does collaboration change? You know, how does the whiteboarding activities, what do you use the office for? You know, do we need as much real estate? And then how long is all this distancing and all of that going on? So we're looking at that. We're also planning for a wave 2, and to be able to start and stop and move on a dime when we have to. And then, you know, keeping an eye on all of the trends in the future. And then our last one is really when we're in a recovery mode. You know, we get to a vaccine, it's effective. Day one, it's not going to have, you know, worldwide distribution. Not everybody's going to take it. We don't know how long it's going to last. So what are our long-term plans around testing, tracing, you know, all of that? And then we're taking it pretty seriously that, you know, these are coming at us more frequently. And I think we all missed it. Doesn't matter what part of the world you were in, where it started or where it's ending up. You know, preparedness and health and safety has now become the #1 goal of any business, if you want to stay in business. And so how do you keep that level of attention and rigor up and build that into your processes for, you know, the next thing that comes along?
Well, yeah, you bring up a couple of good points. Number one, it is an opportunity.
I had some chicken salad.
Somebody wants a chicken salad. However, they should go on mute. If you're not sure of that chicken salad, you need to go on. All right. So there's this idea of you don't want to slip back into the old pattern, right?
No.
So there is crises. They're exhausting, and it wouldn't be great if we could just go back to the way it was. But
it's not going to.
And we shouldn't, right?
Yeah, right.
So I think that's an important call out. And the second thing you brought up that I think is important is that this is going to happen again. And
it will. It might be something different, but it will. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
I mean, we're so connected globally, and we had SARS, we had MERS. Those were not quite as contagious, I guess. They were serious, but fairly isolated to different regions. But there's another one. What if this mutates? What if we get a vaccine and it mutates enough the vaccine's ineffective? Right. So, right, you could have one sooner than later with that scenario. So we're taking that very seriously. I think where we're spending probably most of our time right now is what does this do to our workforce? So, you know, NetUp was not, NetUp liked to see the eyeballs of people in front of them, you know, and that meant you were working. And so when we had to come home around the world, shelter in place, first, we didn't know if we could do it. We were worried about our systems. We were worried about productivity. Zoom and our IT department has just rocked it. We've had like 12,000 people on a Zoom for all hands or town halls. People are more productive. We're measuring that. And now, as one exec said, the genie's out of the bottle. And people are not going to want to go back to that 5 days a week, you know, 8 or 10 or 12, how many hours you put in at your desk in an office. So, you know, we have to reimagine, what is it? Why do people go? Is it that team building? Is it the collaboration? You know, how are we going to downsize our real estate, but still be worried about, all the social distancing. So do we shift people? We've gone to clean desk. We're going to go to hoteling eventually. We've taken the phones off a desk. So we're forcing that transformation as they come back into the office, and whatever that looks like. We're still working through it.
Yeah, and the trends that we saw are actually around a lot of things, around automation, et cetera, around the future of work have absolutely accelerated. And someone put in the chat, imagine if this had happened 5 to 10 years ago, and it would have been much more difficult. So that's absolutely a good point. So, so let's talk a little bit about leadership. That's one of the topics we wanted to cover here. Yeah. And, so I'm sure when you took over crisis management, you thought, oh, that'll be easy. What can really happen? And then boom, you're in it, in the thick of it. So talk about, just give me some background in terms of, you take over this group and, and then this hits, and how did so you had the ramp up of being a new leader and a new discipline.
So I've
boom,
I've had WPR for a few years, and part of that is travel and safety and security. So my teams have always been involved with the crisis team, but it reported to another group, and it basically was one person or two people, right? So this was planned, and so my first point taken on any group, and I've given this talk before to our WIT team, have a well thought out plan. And so I did. I had a really well thought out plan. We could take it on because every crisis we'd ever seen was regional. And I had 2 key regional people that would pretty much do the work. And I'd report to leadership as needed. That was the role I thought I was going to have at the time. But they were like an earthquake or civil unrest or things like that were geographically isolated. This was not expected. So my first thing is have a plan. And if you have to change the plan, you have to change the plan. And so it was immediately evident that I needed to be the leader, kind of the scope of it and the fearfulness of it and the amount of work that my teams were going to have to do. They could not take this on. And I do think that was a good call because being there a long time, knowing all the other leaders, I think either one of my team members who were really competent, the prior leader, they were not at a level where you could just walk up to pretty much any in the company and say, this is what we need to do. So that was really an enabling factor. The other thing I had to be really clear about, I could not be afraid to ask for help. Okay. And so the people that had been leading it and working on it, I sat down with them each one-on-one and said, look, I'm taking this over. We weren't expecting this. Tell me if I'm doing something wrong. Tell me if, something needs to change course. I need your feedback. And so I think that went a long way with that intimate team that met and dealt with things day to day, because I was showing my vulnerability. First off,
humility. You were respectful of their.
I was, and I knew they might be concerned. Okay, and so they really respected that. It resonated with them. The thing about asking for help, and I did, for a few weeks, I'd bounce things off of people. But at a certain point, when you take on a new responsibility, it doesn't matter. And the points I'm going through apply to anything you take on. New job, new responsibility, a system, they're pretty much common sense. But, you can ask for help, but at a certain point, people are like, why is she still asking that? She should know this. She should own this. So that is a key point about knowing when, it's time for you to step up. And so that's a point I think everybody can, internalize and figure out how to do on their own in their projects.
I think one thing people keep in mind, I think sometimes they don't ask for help enough.
Right.
Right. And there was this quote by the former CEO of Coca-Cola. He said, your success is in direct proportion to your ability to ask for help. And to me, that's kind of freeing, because it means, if the CEO of Coca-Cola asks for help, certainly I can. But then you're also saying there's a balance there around quit asking the same question, or you're paying attention, or you should stand on your own. So I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, and this is one where it would not have ever been acceptable to go, well, I didn't want to ask for help. I mean, it's a
Oh.
pandemic, for gosh sakes, right? So everybody would expect that you would ask when you needed it. And everybody, you know, I should always expect that I'm going to get help, right? So it was a two-way on that. You know, jumped in with both feet. I just pretty much everything else was on hold. I had, you know, the leaders on my team picked it up, just dived in, you know, and I've done that on other projects. And to me, that means, one, it means a lot of hours, but I always communicate with my team to tell them, this is the expectation, you know, this is, we're not going to do one-on-ones. We might need to skip a team meeting, we'll change to a huddle. And I always try to meet the global leaders on their turf. So if that means I get up at 3 o'clock for a morning meeting because I need to talk to somebody in India or EMEA, and that's the only time that I can do it, you know, that's what I'll do. And, you know, my family knows that. They know it's kind of how you start a project, especially one like this. And, you know, so jump in with both feet, but also make the people around you aware of what you're doing so that you just, you know, don't disappear, right, from daily activities. Probably one of the most important things on this, people were scared to death, okay? And nobody knew really more than me. You know, I mean, everybody knew the same. I'm not trying to say anymore. But the calmness was super important, to have that calming voice. I think we did a really good job as a company of a lot of communications. We did a lot of town halls, myself and our CEO. We did another one where we had hired medical advice. So we brought our doctor, is our version of, you know, the NIH doctor. I can't remember his name at the moment, but
Fauci? You're talking about Fauci?
Yeah, we call him our Dr. Fauci. He's
Okay.
Dr. Tuggy. And so he, you know, we did a town hall with him and people, we had tons of chat.
Oh, that's nice.
And this kind of format. And so people were very reassured that, you know, we weren't just making this up on our own or reading news articles. We were getting real advice.
Yeah, interesting. Some of the people that reported to me, actually, so I'm based out of Chicago, and they literally had riots on their street and had damage to their property. And that was very, as you can imagine, that was very unsettling to them. So to be able to have a sense of empathy and understanding and give all kinds of grace around situations like that, I think is incredibly important. There were mental health issues that rose up, and their families were at risk, and they were at risk, et cetera. And I had people who have autoimmune issues or lung issues, and they're like, you know, I can't. So, you know, having that, a lot, you talk about the importance of communication, authenticity, transparency, empathy. It's common sense, but not always common practice. I think you're bringing up a good point.
Yeah, and I think, you know, on different occasions, I would use myself as an example, or I would give other people, I would just, you know, there was a woman and she was an executive, and this was before we had shut down travel, and she felt obliged to get on a plane to go to London, and her husband was home with cancer. And she was freaked out about it. And I said, then don't go. I'm giving you permission. Tell them you can't go. It's not safe. And, you know, she was a mature person, but for whatever reason, it was like, okay, somebody who is an authority figure by whatever, you know, it was deemed I was. And she was so, I mean, she was dang near in tears because it was like, you're right, I shouldn't go. I also used myself, you know, when I was talking to our CEO staff, because when we first went home, and I saw a lot of companies do this, it was like, how quick can we get back? How quick can we get back? And so there was a ton of pressure on to build that plan. And so I, you know, described what that would look like with temperature checks and health certs and masks all day and the distancing and, you know, not using your cafeteria, eating a box lunch at your desk. And, you know, and I said, you know, and I think a lot of people will probably do Zoom from their desk. And one person said, well, that's crazy. Why would somebody come to work and do Zoom from their desk? And I said, you know, I would do that. If I was called to the CEO meeting or I was called to, you know, an executive meeting, I'd go in person. But if you've told me to come to work, I'm going to come to work. But, you know, based on my age, my health, and my husband, you know, is a cancer survivor, recent. I'm not going to be trotting around the halls
Right.
chatting with folks. And so,
Right.
we're on Zoom, but you could visibly see them all kind of go, oh, wow, we get it. And the tone changed, So I do think you have to have a lot of individual courage, and maturity about it. I mean, I'm just at that point in my career where I'm not afraid of trying to use myself or really tell people how it is. I do it in a way that is not confrontational. I think that's really important. But, sometimes I don't use it too much, but I have used it a few times in this, and it's been really helpful. Probably the last thing, and you cannot, again, whether it's pandemic or a project, you have to communicate. We have weekly communications, all these town halls we've done, all the FAQs, what's going on, when are we coming back? So we're over communicating. But if you take that and equate it to like another project, what I've seen in the past with projects, especially when they're not going well, you're like, oh, I don't want to communicate. Oh, I want to make it get green. I want it to turn to green again before I tell them, we don't want to report yellow or red. And not communicating is always worse. Okay.
Always.
Bad news doesn't smell better a week later. Trust me.
No, right. I can think of mistakes I've made that had I just spoken up sooner, it's been such a big deal. Yeah. And that's one thing you learn over time.
You do. Yeah. So, those are kind of the 4 or 5 things that I use from my, past leadership experiences and applied them here. And, they seem to have served us well. We do a ton of benchmarking, which again, you should do with whatever project or role you've taken on. And, we don't want to be the leader. We don't want to be the first in the office. We don't want to be the first declaring work from home. But, it's helped us validate that we're doing all the right things. We're not missing steps. We're in the leadership part of the pack. And we're keeping our employees safe. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and, in terms of communication, it doesn't, the typical channels like town halls, et cetera, are incredibly important. And one of the things that people have told me has been helpful to them that I've done is I've had a regular cyber coffee where I'm hanging out on Zoom or, from 9 to 9:30 or 10, and I'm having my coffee. And anybody who wants to just pop in and talk to me can do that. A number of people who were feeling very disconnected and really appreciated that we didn't have to talk about business, and we were having a cup of coffee, and those were very well attended and very appreciated. So something as simple and cheap as that, right?
We've done a lot of that. We also opened up Zoom for the weekend and evenings for families. That was one of after week 2, I fought for that. I was like, we got to do this. Smart. Because people are going to miss that connection. They can't go see them. That's been hugely popular. When we shut down our health clubs, we converted to online training, or we've done online yoga, and that's been popular. A lot of happy hours, a lot of games. Our sales academy, which is basically new college hires, they've done a virtual scavenger hunt. So that's kind of cool. So you just have to be creative,
Yeah, be creative. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, first of all, you listed off 4 or 5 things, and as we talked earlier, those can apply to any situation, which is fantastic. Yeah. And now let's talk about, we're moving from crisis into chaos, which I say is where opportunity can live if we keep our wits about us. So how do you recognize opportunity in chaos?
I think that's fun, unfortunately.
Oh, it's a skill.
No, it is. And so, that's how you can really transform the company, So if we can become a more flexible company about our work strategy or work from home or flexible work, there's lots of opportunity around where you can attract talent, employee satisfaction and flexibility. Over time, it should reduce real estate costs and operating costs. And that's money you can pour back into, R&D or acquisition or whatever, so I see that as an opportunity. I really think that digitalization of how you communicate and do the trade shows and interaction, and think about the carbon footprint all this is saving, not being on airplanes, not driving around. And that may or may not mean savings for your company, but it certainly is helping the earth, when you can see across a cityscape in India. I mean, I've been going to India for 15 years and I've never seen a cityscape until some of the pictures I've seen. And the other thing that I've found with this is, and this is less about chaos and more the people side. At work, I'd say we were but we were a siloed company. And, we're one of those companies, and I think everybody's like this, that, I'm awesome, my team's awesome. It's all those other people that are the problem somehow, right? And that's just somewhat human nature. I've seen teams that probably didn't get along or work as well. Just give each other grace and listen. And the kudos the teams are giving each other is incredible. Kudos to our IT team, our supply chain team, and, my team. And the way people have been generous with their, thank you is really nice. So it's just kind of a kinder, gentler environment, and I'm appreciating it. So,
and we end our all hands meeting with a gratitude couple of minutes where people just type in thank you to this person for that.
Yeah,
it's really just nice to see that come out. Now there is go ahead.
Yeah, well, like on our town halls, the chat is going nuts. Yeah. And so it's about 2/3 of it is thank you, and about 1/3 of it is it cocktail time? So it's one of the two, but it's always fun to watch.
Well, and there is opportunity in a recession. The class,
yes.
There are a number of like Groupon, a number of very famous Uber, all started during recession, et cetera. And there's the really famous example of going back to the Depression, which was post Grape Nuts cereal was like the only cereal on the market. And when the recession hit, they pulled back on their marketing. And Kellogg leaned in.
Right.
Kellogg just scooped up a huge chunk of the market. And it's sometimes to think that way of investing when you don't have as much cash coming in, right? It can be a little bit scary.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've already seen, the easiest sell today is one of our inside sales reps calling up and talking to people about moving over to cloud. And people are jumping on that because they couldn't physically go to their data center, or whoever was, third-party data center. It was still, shelter in place is tough, right? So we've seen a lot more people interested in the cloud, moving to the cloud. So I do think there's definitely some business opportunities out there. I'll tell you the thing that's taken off, you can see where people have moved to. I get probably 20 emails or calls a day about contact tracing apps. And so, people are looking ahead about that and some really creative, different ways of doing it. A lot of privacy concerns about it.
Sure.
So you have to worry about that. But I do think, I think the whole working remote and how you engage with customers and partners is going to change. I really do. I don't know what it is yet. I think we have to force it. And I think we have to look at all of our processes and how do we simplify them and how do we digitalize them and make them easy. And then that will make work at home long-term effective and useful.
And even before a crisis, there's always this incredible tension between short-term and long-term thinking, right? So it's always, there's this massive, I should be thinking ahead, but I can't because I've got to answer this email or whatever it is. And that just, exacerbated during a crisis. And people need to get that settled before they can think about the opportunity in the chaos. And what we have found is, this is a joke I say, but it's so true, is that we are knowledge workers and we have no time to think.
That's true. That's true.
To create that white space and give people the opportunity to actually think about what the opportunity could be, they can,
Right.
you know, and put some structure around this. So, you know, we talk about, you know, what are your competitors doing? You know, how has your customer changed? You know, what's the future of your industry? How can artificial intelligence impact it? And give people that space to kind of think those things through, because we're knowledge workers. We have no time to think. It's crazy.
Yeah, you know, for probably the last 10 years, I've made a concentrated effort to always keep some research time on my calendar, you know, and so, you know, when we first started hearing about RPA, you know, 5 years ago, right? I went out and read every article I could. I talked to all the vendors. And so, you know, that's how I educate myself. And I'm reading the news, I'm reading every article, every study that comes out on this. And you know, when you're learning, here's another piece of advice, is when you're learning something new, you know, sometimes you only have to be half a step ahead. It's harder to get farther ahead than that, just given the pace of change and the unknown with this. But, you know, and you need to keep people, there's so much information and disinformation around the pandemic out there and what it will look like, right? And so, you know, now I find that's a lot of what I'm doing, is kind of being this teacher. So, you know, hey, are we going to do testing when we come back? And I'm like, well, you know, we haven't made a decision yet, but how often would we test? Are we going to test every week? Do you understand the cost of that? How many people? You know, and so, or contact trace, or antibody. Well, we don't know how long, you know, those are good for. The testing is 50% inaccurate. Do we really want to spend money on that yet? So, you know, I mean, I do think that's part of transformation, is knowing which ones are no regret moves that you can move forward with right now to make a transformation go forward. And then which ones you kind of got to watch on that near-term horizon, and you need to keep up with people. But you need to learn more and see some proof points. And then there's the really long-term, you know, where are you really going to go? And, you know, I think that's the hardest part in this now, because there's still, you know, so much misinformation. We don't know the end point on this one. Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask you for a concluding statement before I do that, and we're going to move into Q&A. So think of something wise. But what I heard you talk about was, I love the statement of a no regret move. I think that's great. And also the point around carving out learning time.
Yeah.
And the first 2 hours of my day and the last hour of my day, I don't allow any meetings. So then Fridays I have blocked off for research and all that, because just the meetings, my calendar, it's like calendar confetti. It's like it's just these little bits of time, and and you're knowledge workers. Our value is not just the do, it's the think, and you can't think in 15-minute increments and get things as, you know, as strategic as you want them to be. So I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that is the difference between a knowledge worker and a leader. That leader knows that they have to have that time so they can stay above the fray and have that time to be thoughtful and planful and know where you're going. Your knowledge workers are going to crank out an immense amount of work, and they're going to make a lot of innovation. But if they don't have somebody, you know, leading them or trying to drive to where you want to go, you know, you can spin pretty quickly with a lot of money, because they're expensive knowledge workers.
That's absolutely right. And there's sort of like the difference between working in the business and working on the business, and people to take a step back and see where they're supposed to be. So I'll move us into Q&A for the last few minutes. I am going to end at like 5 minutes too, because people need breaks. We forget about that. But to recap, we talked a little bit about, you know, our lessons learned in our career journey. We talked about the patterns and disruption, going from normal to crisis to chaos, and then the new normal and where the opportunity is, and some ideas around how you can capitalize on that opportunity. And then we talked about sort of your 4 or 5 step plan or approach that you have as you go through these sorts of things, and how as knowledge workers, we need to carve out that space, that white space, and give ourselves input, do research, understand what our competitors are doing or whatever, and to come up with those new ideas to lead people forward. So did I sum up things fairly well?
I think so.
All right, with that, I'm going to see if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or is that in the Q&A? Is there a difference? Okay, I'm going to move over to Q&A and take a look at that. No open questions. All right.
Either one is okay.
All right, I'll monitor them. I'll monitor them all. And I can see here someone put in the chat, I remember the good old days of business travel around the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a point at which when the flight attendant knows how you take your coffee, maybe it's too much, but I've always actually enjoyed getting out and interacting directly with the world. It's nice though to have a little bit of a balance and step back from that. I also see, okay, we talked about what if this happened a number of years ago. We're fortunate to have the technology that can support us. You mentioned that in crisis, here's a new question. You mentioned that in crisis, there's no chance to focus on innovation. Does this cause delays that may be critical for future growth?
Well,
when we talk about crisis, I'm talking about there's the short term, and I bet you there's a lot of innovation that goes on to scramble to get to.
There was.
Right, and I don't know if you wanted to speak to that. And then when you move into chaos, things have stabilized a little bit, then you can.
Yeah, so we, starting in, we started, so I inherited this January 21st, and we had our first crisis meeting the next day. And the day after that is when Wuhan was shut down. So, we have 100 sites and sales offices and e-suites around the world. So we were watching it early. But we didn't have a pandemic plan. So we started working on that. Just monitor. So it was this daily, when I say crisis, it was daily monitoring. Where are people? Are people traveling? Are they safe? All of what are we going to do about, we changed some HR policies. We did a work at home stipend. We had a lot of things. So it was very tactical and in the moment, and so the crisis meetings were every day, an hour plus a day with daily readouts, things like that. Right. So that's in the moment. And that lasted probably till April,
Oh, okay, it's a long time.
Early April. And then it was like, okay, now we need to think forward. And so, it probably was about a week lag. That's I probably could have acted a week sooner, but it just took me a moment to, recognize where we were. And then we, well, not really, but just internalize where we were. And then focus on the innovation, what we could do. So, yeah.
All right, any other questions? Do you think this crisis will accelerate change in places that have been talked about but never implemented? Yes.
I hope so. Yeah. I really hope so. I do think it's up to, each company's leadership to push it now. I think they're all looking at the benchmarks. They're all looking at their peers. So there's a lot of peer pressure to do that. And, I think especially if it ends with more revenue in the long run or better customer outcomes, then that will be when people really jump on it. Or better employee, higher satisfaction, or you're able to attract the right people because you change your workforce policy. So corporations are corporations. They got to see the proof points. So I think it's around, revenue, customer experience, employee retention, and maybe attraction rate. Those three will affect corporate. I think there's definitely some product innovation in there that, you're going to see. And, some of that's probably evolving for, depending on how long this lasts and what the new models look like.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, that some of these things that people were going to do, they're going to do sooner. In terms of automation, and, there's always talk about the future of work, and we got a lot of that forced on us pretty quickly.
Right.
So I do think that it will accelerate change to the questioner's point. I do see another question here. With having a background in safety, travel, and security, do you see the need for human-oriented services as more necessary for businesses? How would one go about filling that need for a company that doesn't have that position in place?
Oh, yeah. Well, it depends. I mean, if I were starting out and had to hire for that position in a small company, I'd try and find a jack of all trades. If you went, I mean, they're very different skill sets. Where they intersect is in what's called duty of care and in crisis, times of crisis. So, you know, I'd probably try and find a jack of all trades that had done at least maybe 2 of those areas or at least one of them. But I'd probably go off of the safety or the WPR, you know, ops kind of people.
WPR,
Travel's
you should
kind of unique.
explain.
Workplace resources, so the facilities teams, they run all the operations, yeah, and the buildings and everything. Travel is kind of a niche, and you know, most companies, a lot of them have really small travel teams, or it's completely outsourced, so you're more likely to buy that expertise. You can buy some expertise on security, but it's always nice to have a few internal that are, you know, your knowledge workers.
You know, we've talked about, so thank you. We've talked about the pandemic situation, but what do you see, and this will have to be the last question, what do you see in terms of crisis management focus on climate change impacts? Are you seeing that yet?
No, I mean, I hear people talking about it, but I think everybody's so consumed in the moment now. You see it more on the news or in articles, you know, like I said, the smog's down, all of that. But I do think, especially with the younger people, that's going to return as #1 issue. Let me just tell you, my 23-year-old son, that is the top of his mind. It was until this hit. Now that's kind of, you know, we're in the moment here. But I do think climate changes, you know, could be greatly reduced if we, you know, took advantage of some of the things we're doing now, because we have to. Let's just think through them, you know.
Even things like, from a crisis management perspective, there's going, in Chicago, the impact of climate change is already, and it was projected to be more high temperature, more low temperature, and more rain. The hurricane season this year is projected to be it's supposed to be really aggressive this year. And, you know, is that part of a crisis management team's mandate to include these climate related impacts?
You know, I think it depends on the company. We have risk management, so enterprise risk management, and that's where that would fall in, or business continuity. But that's where that would fall in our, you know, in our company. I think each group might do it differently.
All right, we are at time. We got some great questions. Thank you for everybody who chipped in and took advantage of Kathy and her great experience.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate the time. I took a lot of notes. I learned a lot, and I appreciate you being so generous with your time to share with us.
Thank you, Marian. It was a pleasure meeting you and talking to you the other day, and I hope everybody stays safe.